To those of you who do not already know Father Tim Norton, the disappearing, helpful priest who has been going between the two sides of our table up here. First of all, Tim, thank you for presiding at liturgy this morning. Tim is a member of the Society of the Divine Word, the priests who are so graciously welcoming us to their center. He is also a trained physical therapist. That was his ministry in his earlier years. Tim is the director of interculturality for the Society of the Divine Word. He has been working in this area of interculturality for years and has been living it also. We had Tim with us at the Extended Council in 2020. The intercultural core team, our intercultural core team, Dolores, Christina, Rashmi, and Ileane, did the UISG seminar on interculturality and training of core teams. And Tim was one of the presenters there. That's how we got to know Tim. And so we are really excited to have Tim with us today to move us a little further along in our understanding of interculturality and how we actually live interculturality, helping us get a clearer idea of that. Just as a side note, Tim was recently appointed as the auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Brisbane, Australia. I say it's a side note because it's really, Tim really, he would prefer to continue doing what he's doing, is probably the best way to say this. But the church in Australia is certainly blessed to have him. They will realize that after he's been there a while. So in any event, we really welcome you, Tim, and we're excited to listen to you today. I want to know, Navia, can you videotaping?
Can I stand there?
Yeah, here's
Do you need my, here, if I turn this way, does this help you? Okay.
So good morning, everyone. It's nice to be able to say good morning in the sense that we are all sharing the morning, because I'm more used to being on Zoom where I just say hello. You never know if people are in morning or evening or night. I usually begin by acknowledging my Indigenous brothers and sisters who made this particular stole for me as an important part of my life, and an important part of the world, an important part of church. And my qualifications in interculturality are not academic. I joined the SPD when I was 25, and the cultural change from physical sciences, as Sally said, I was a physiotherapist. So from working with muscles and bones and backs and legs, I moved to seminary where they started to talk about theology and philosophy. That cultural change for me was almost impossible to endure. And in those early years, I was very close to leaving the seminary. As it happened, everybody else left except me. I was the only one who remained in my group. I was missioned to Mexico very happily. I had hoped to go to India, but that was simply impossible for missionaries. So Mexico was a wonderful second choice for me. I was there for 7 years, but been the youngest Australian-born SVD by 10 years, and I continue to hold that particular title. I was called back to Australia to work in initial formation. So the experience of living and working in Mexico was extremely helpful for me. Back in the initial formation work, there were 16 students from 11 different countries. After 7 years in that work, I was elected to leadership of the province, and the Australia province included New Zealand and Thailand. It now includes Myanmar. And at that time, there were 60 of my confreres in ministry, brothers and priests in the province, from 21 different countries. At the end of 9 years of leadership, I was asked by the society to come here and run our sabbatical courses for my brothers from all around the world. And there are lots of other people who come here as well, people like your good selves in your chapters, but lots of people who are in Rome from various general councils and secretaries come here for retreats, and we are involved in guiding retreats here as well. So all of that is, if I have a qualification, it is all of that. I think a lot about culture. I think a lot about my culture, and I think a lot about the culture of other people and how important culture is in our lives. So a few of these slides, some of you will have seen before, perhaps many of you, I'm not actually sure how many have done or what you've done. I know you've worked with my colleague, Adriana Milmanda from Argentina. I was online with her yesterday. We have a resource committee for interculturality between ourselves as SVD and our sisters, the Holy Spirit, sister servants of the Holy Spirit. And we're trying to gather ourselves in various parts of the world to focus on this area of interculturality. Anthony Gittins is a Spiritan priest. He is English by birth, worked in Sierra Leone, and has subsequently worked in Chicago subsequently worked in Chicago for maybe 30 years or more as a missiologist. I met him 3 years ago, and knowing that there are more than 300 definitions of culture, I asked him for one that I could use in my work, and he gave me this one. The way people in groups react to and form and shape their environments. And one of my SVD brothers, an anthropologist from India, Michael Sebastian, has done some really interesting work on culture and geography, how important geography is for the way cultures develop. A good example of that is Netherlands. Our mother house is in the Netherlands, and so I have been travelling there 2 and 3 times a year with my groups of brothers that are on sabbatical. And each time I go, I ask to borrow somebody's bicycle, because there is no country in the world I know that has the infrastructure for bicycles that the Netherlands has. And the reason it can have such an infrastructure is because it is flat. Geography is very important. You could not have this infrastructure in Nepal. You could not have this infrastructure in the mountainous areas of India or the USA or Australia. It's flat. 48% of adults go to work by bicycle every day in the Netherlands. That's an extraordinary statistic, and can only be that statistic because of geography. So culture is something that we rarely question, that becomes a part of us, and we teach it to others without really knowing why. So if you think about who taught you how to be a girl in the various parts of India that you come from, in Italy, France, Norway, USA, who taught you how to live out your culture? Mostly it would be our family, our neighbours, our school teachers, etc. And if I ask you, did they know they were teaching you about culture? Mostly they didn't. Perhaps when you were learning the national anthem at school, yes, or some cultural songs, yes, so that was intentional. But mostly, it's not intentional. But we do it, and we don't really know how or why we do it. Culture is so important that it is the framework within which we situate almost everything that we come to know or learn. And most importantly, culture gives us a sense of belonging. And for those of us who move around in the majority of the world stays in its first culture and lives there. Nevertheless, there is an increasing number of people in the world on the move, and some with disastrous and tragic results, as we saw in the news this morning. So I'm sure you've seen this, the idea of culture being using the metaphor of an iceberg. Has anyone here ever seen an iceberg? Anyone? 1, 2, 3. Oh, of course, the people from Norway and Sweden. Yeah, of course. I rarely work with people from the Nordic countries. But it's a metaphor that most of us understand, that 15 to 20% of the ice is above the water and perhaps the rest is below. And so the part above the water would be what we understand to be external culture, things that are available to us through our senses. We can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell them. And sometimes these things are uncomfortable for those of us who live with people from other places. For example, when Sally cooks the supper on Thursday nights, she always uses a lot of chili. And the people in her community don't like chili, but they are afraid to tell her in case they hurt her feelings. Nevertheless, it is something we can finally talk about because it is available to us. The information is there. We are perspiring and sweating while we are eating Sally's dinner, and we know. So we can have conversations that can be difficult, but this is the easy stuff. The hard stuff are our attitudes, beliefs, our myths, because for most of us from our first culture, we hold this information unconsciously. We don't hold it in a conscious place. And so how is anyone else that we are living with going to know this about us when we act out of it, but we're not always so aware of it? And I use the example of going to Mexico. Before I went, I was told that in Mexico people would greet me with an embrace, un abrazo. So I had to think about this before I left Australia. I had to think I need to get used to this because in my family and mostly in my culture, people did not do this. That has changed now. When I got to Mexico, there were 5 SVDs at the airport to greet me and my companion, also Australian. None of them were Mexican, but all of them greeted us with an abrazo. Why? Because that's what you do in Mexico. And within a few months, after doing it all day, every day, I started to have some feelings about this that I actually like this. So it went from a thought to a feeling. And after about 3 months, it went to here. And I forgot about it. And that is where we hold a lot of culture, even new culture. We hold it in an unconscious place. So this is the way I imagine it, from here to here, down to here. Then when returning to Australia, again my older brother at the airport, you can imagine, was waiting for me. We had never been apart for 2 years before. So we were genuinely excited to see each other. So he put out his hand, I put out my hand, and I drew him into an abrazo. And he pushed me away. And he said, I don't know how you translate this, "What the hell are you doing to me?" So and then it came from down here, immediately up here, and I thought, oh, Tim, you don't do this in Australia. So I said, let's start again. Hello. It did not feel right anymore because I had changed. Culture changes us. Very clearly, I had changed. I desperately wanted to give him an abrazo. His wife was there, Deborah, and she has Italian parents. So it was fine to give her an abrazo. And when I gave her an abrazo, she said to me, "You are very good at this. Can you teach him how to do it? Because he is awful." Anyhow, my brother and I made an agreement that we will give each other an abrazo, birthdays and Christmas. But what I've noticed that his children, my niece and nephew, now in their 30s, but when I used to take them to school, they were all giving each other abrazos. Culture changes. And culture can change rapidly, as we see now with social media. So in Australia there are various Catholic migrant groups, Filipinos, Polish, Slovak, Hungarian, etc. They want to celebrate the Mass as they celebrated it when they were children. They don't want any change because their identity is totally in that. Whereas at home, things have changed. Things have changed dramatically. But the migrant group still holds their identity from something that was from the past. That can be quite difficult. We work a lot with migrant groups in different parts of the world. And just a word about generations X and Y who are joining you. There was a time when if questions were asked, for example, a Generation Y young woman comes to your community and she does her work on computer rather late at night, so morning prayer at 5:30 is difficult for her. And so she says to the community leader, can we change the morning prayer to 6:30? And the community leader says no. And when the young woman asks why, she is told, because it's always been done this way. Now, I got told that a lot, so my generation has dealt with that. We just accepted it. New generations of people won't accept that. We need to think things through. Why do we do things the way that we do? Younger people want to know and want to understand. And sometimes we've forgotten why we hold some of the traditions that we hold. We just do it that way. So saying it's always been done this way, it was not appropriate back then, and it's definitely not appropriate now. Just a couple of definitions for you. Monocultural communities, mostly raised in one cultural, linguistic environment, and show ethnocentrism. Where I grew up, all the families in the street were Anglo-Australian. In Sydney, I'm a city boy, except for the family across the road, who were migrants from Lebanon. And two of those boys were in the same class as my brother, and my brother, who tells me he is not intercultural at all, made friends with them from the beginning and has maintained those friendships all his life. They are now 68 years old. We actually all have some of these skills if we choose to exercise them. Even my brother. Multicultural communities are communities that have within them people from different parts of the world or different ethnic groups. They tolerate diversity. They acknowledge difference, like food and clothing. But they have a preference to stay with their cultural friends. Most of our communities in the world, as religious, are multicultural rather than intercultural. Multicultural speaks of presence of different cultural groups. Just presence. So we have communities of men from different places who pray with each other, they eat with each other, but they really know nothing about each other. So what we are aiming for are these communities that value equality, respect, freedom, mutuality. Communities that intentionally foster reciprocal relationships, working towards communities of people who trust. With my brothers who come here for their sabbatical courses, I've learned over time that a good number of my brothers have forgotten how to trust anybody. So they've moved to other cultures, and they've never really made relationships with people they trust. And they wait till they go home on holiday to enjoy those relationships again. That became clear to me in the first group that I've worked with. So we do a lot of small group work here and personal development work to try and help our brothers learn again what it is to trust someone, especially someone who is different from you. One of the main features of interculturality is that it is intentional. It rarely just happens. And so we have to be smart and collaborative in thinking through ways to be more intercultural, to become more intercultural. If we wait for it to happen, we may be waiting a very, very long time. So I was at a conference last week, and Pat Murray, Loretto's sister, the Secretary General of the UISG, was speaking. It is always good to listen to Pat. And she was talking about interculturality involving things like study, good, honest conversations, reflection, and time on this journey from multiculturality to interculturality. And I would add to that life experience. So believe it or not, that is an image of me back in the days when I had hair. And I am sitting on a train with my very good friend Russell. Now, having been away from Australia, it's become clear to me that in Australia we often cut names as short as possible. I am Timothy, Tim. My brother is Christopher, Chris. His wife is Deborah, Deb. This is Russell, Russ. We met when I was 15. We were on holidays, my father, mother, sister and I. We were in an apartment by the sea upstairs. He was in the apartment downstairs with his mother. And my mother, who was a social worker, said to my sister and I, "Tonight, after supper, you two will go downstairs and play with that boy." Now, neither my sister nor I wanted to go downstairs and play with that boy, but you don't say no to Mum. So we went down, and my sister and I still remember we had a really fun evening with the woman and her son. And I realised that the boy, Russ, was the same age as me. The next day, I was looking out the window of the apartment, and I saw his mother push his wheelchair to a flat place on a path near the sea. She then went to the supermarket. I was curious. I wanted to know him a little better. So I went down and I had the sense not to stand over him, but to sit on the ground next to him. But then I didn't know what to say. He started the conversation. We became friends for the rest of his life. Sadly, he died 15 years ago. You can see from the image, we're on a train and the train is moving, and Russell had a form of muscular dystrophy, so had never walked, and his muscles had never developed. His legs did not work at all, nor did one arm. He had enough movement in the other arm to manage the control of his electric wheelchair when he got one some years later. And so I'm holding, I can see it now, and looking at the image, I asked someone to send me these images. I'm holding the rail of the train and the arm of his chair just to hold him a little more stable. I notice that now, but that's what friends do. I was doing that naturally by this stage. Russell had never had a friend who was able-bodied. And I had never had a friend who was not able-bodied. At this stage, I was studying physiotherapy. I suspect my relationship with Russ influenced my choice of careers. Russell, on the other hand, who was much more intelligent than me, was limited to working in a small factory for people with disabilities. Unfortunately, he had much more possibility and capacity, but couldn't work in anything else. He and I took long drives in my car, and he was brave enough one day when we were drinking too much beer to ask me to help him urinate, go to the toilet, and to hold that hospital-style bottle while he urinated in the bottle. That was, for me, a particularly important moment in our relationship because I didn't want to do it, and I could have said no. But I could see the courage he had to ask me. So I said yes, and we drank more beer. So we ate sometimes in restaurants, we visited friends from his boarding school. All of them were people who lived with disabilities, even his work friends. So I realised now, looking back, that gradually I was moving into another world, into his world, of people with disabilities. So he and I talked about love and sex, marriage, as young men do, and he often said how lucky I was, because I would fall in love with someone and get married and begin a family and have children. Then I went to the seminary, and Russell met Patricia, who we call Trish. Russell asked me to be the best man at his wedding. And the best man means the person next to him, the one to accompany him, to carry the rings. I was a novice at this stage. Fortunately, he lived and was married in the city very close to the novitiate, which was 1,000 kilometres from my home place. Again, that's me with hair. And his other close friend, Peter. And men don't talk about, we don't talk about our relationships or the quality of our relationships. It's rather rare, and I think that crosses cultures. Perhaps women do that a little more. I didn't know how close we were until he asked me to be his best man, and not Peter. He'd known Peter since he was 5 years old. So I invited Russ and Trish to my ordination. They chose to travel 1,000 kilometres, and I realised just how difficult it is for people like Russ and Trish to travel those distances. I was able to rent a vehicle that we could drive around in and rent ramps so Russell could get in and out of places. And my friends, if you look at my friends, they're all Anglo-Australian. I look now, all just like me in ethnic origin. And today was finally able to meet Russ and Trish that I had talked so much about. So at the time that I was ordained, and there was nobody left to be ordained but me, surely it was a busy time, but they stayed with me. Of course, they stayed with me. Russell wouldn't trust anyone else except me. That became very clear. So the quality of our relationship became clear to me with those steps Russell took in our relationship. I can look back now and know much more about that than I knew at the time. First I was a teenager, then I was a young man in my 20s, and I was actually doing what my intuition was telling me to do. To be friends with this guy who was friends with me, and we came to care about each other a great deal. Russ and Trish did something they said they would never do. They had a baby. Russell had a terrible sense of humour, so I knew that the birth was close. Anyhow, he rang me the night Erin was born, and he said, "I know what you're thinking. It's okay. She has 2 arms and 2 legs." And then he added, "But it's the 2 heads that we are worried about." She did not have 2 heads. But I'll never forget watching Trish change the nappies or the diapers of Erin, holding Erin on the floor with her feet and changing that big pin, there was no Velcro there, with her mouth and her teeth. And like a mother lion, she would carry Erin around the house, using her mouth, holding the diaper. Trish has problems even today with her teeth because of that. When she was 3, Erin took me to her bedroom, to the sitting room, to show me a new doll that she got for her birthday. I was visiting. So I followed her to the sitting room, and she picked up the doll and she gave it to me. She said, "Do you like my doll?" I found it difficult to answer because Erin had picked up the doll with her foot and given it to me, standing on one leg and giving me the doll with the other foot. We learn culture from the people around us. She could have given it to me with her hand, but that's not what Mummy does. Mum does everything with her feet. It's a really good example for me of where and how we learn culture. I just thought to myself, Erin, when you go to school, maybe you won't do that so much with the other children. I don't know how they will react to you picking things up with. All of us could do that. As a physiotherapist, I know this, but we don't practice, so we can't. Trish did things every day. Trish did crosswords with her foot every day. But I'll never forget Russell looking at his daughter. The daughter he thought he would never have. So the reason I tell you this story is that I want you to take a few minutes now, while Marit plays the flute for us, to think about, in the early chapters of your personal story, what experiences have you had of entering into the world of the other? You probably did it quite naturally. It may have been a neighbour who was different, someone at school, in the choir, on a sports team, but in that earlier part of your life, can you think of an experience you had where you moved into the world of the other? And can you think of what that was like for you? I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. Thank you, Marit. Beautiful. Before we move on, are there one or two people that would be brave enough to share what they have been thinking about? I've just exposed half my soul here, so somebody, please.
I am in English. Immediately I was thinking of the experience I always use when I'm talking about different denominations. I was born in Germany, in an area where there were few Catholics, but we were going to church every Sunday. And my friends, only boys, we were playing together, and then one Sunday morning I went down already because I was ready to go for Mass, waiting for my parents, my sister, and then this boy said, "Oh, can't we play together?" And I told him, "No, I can't, because I have my nice clothes on, I have to go to Mass, to church." And then he said, "Oh, we are only going once a year for Mass, for service. It's on Christmas." And I told him, "We are going every Sunday." So this was what it was. We were playing together after Mass in the afternoon, but not when we had to go for Mass. And for me this was just, it's like this. There are some that are not going for Mass, and we are going for Mass, and this is okay. No problems for that.
So moments of realization, moments of acknowledging something is different here. It's not better and it's not worse. It is just different. Thank you. One more, please.
Journal in English. When I was studying in the college, one Hindu boy, Brahmin, fell in love with me. So by all means, he wanted to marry me. And I was still junior, but I loved him and he also loved me. He loved me in the sense that I should become his partner. But I loved him to keep him as my best friend. But we had a lot of outing, and we had been going out and visiting his house, and he came to my house. But in my family, when they saw a Hindu boy coming to my family, they were angry. How you can be in love with this boy, being a religious? But still, I was telling my family that, we were studying together. He is a great help in my studies. But later on, he was forcing me to marry. Then I made him to understand my way of life. Then I spoke to the provincial at that time. If she could accept him that he can come for my final vows, to make him understand what is my commitment, maybe he will understand my choice. So the provincial accepted that he could come for my final vows. He came, and the very fact, soon after the final profession, he came to me and said, "Jonah, I am very sorry for harassing you for this many years, for not understanding you. And moreover, even till today, he respects my choice, and I also love him, and I speak to his whole family and his children, and that acceptance of different views and cultures came once we have witnessed and understood." Thank you.
Thank you. So as a young person, acknowledging tensions between people around feelings, but being willing to step into difficult situations, both you and the boy, into different worlds, and also the provincial. What a good provincial. I'm glad to hear you have some good provincials. It gives me hope for you. Thank you. This may be a cartoon image of you and your sisters, all superheroes, all forever doing the right thing, doing the will of God, just as God wants you to. But actually, I think this is more like you and more like us in church, in the world. We are short, we are tall, we are fat, we are thin, we are different colours, we have different abilities and different limitations. And Mother Teresa has something nice to say about us living in intercultural communities. It was not her intention, but that's how I interpret it. You can do what I cannot do. I can do what you cannot do. And together we can do great things. So a little about leadership. You are all leaders. When we look in the world at people who are leaders, what do they tell us? So Sheryl Sandberg, who was the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook. Leadership is about making others better because of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. So I think of me as provincial in Australia with 60 men from 19 countries at a time when sexual abuse was becoming a major topic, a major theme in church. And I was desperately interested that my brothers did not make mistakes, big mistakes in relationships as they crossed cultures into Australia. That they didn't make any mistakes was impossible because I know I'd made mistakes. But we did so many workshops on professional standards to the point where some of the guys would say, "Tim, we're not doing professional standards again, are we?" And I would say, "Look, just one more time," because I was interested in exactly this, about when they were with me, they were understanding ways of behaving in their professional lives, their ministry lives, and their personal lives in this new place, so that when I went away, they still understood good ways to behave in their professional lives, their ministry lives, and their personal lives. This is a good metaphor of interculturality in leadership. This guy was... This guy was the Chief of Staff of the US Army, Eric Shinseki. Now, look at him, and you know that either he is a migrant or his parents or grandparents were migrants to the US. You can only imagine the mountains he had to climb as an Asian American in order to get to this point in the US Army. So when someone like that speaks, you listen. And when he says, you must love those you lead before you can be an effective leader, I think he says it with some conviction, and he's a man saying this, he's a soldier saying this. If that's important for a man who leads soldiers, it's equally important for us. That even when our sisters and our brothers are driving us crazy, the aim is to love them across all sorts of cultural challenges. That's right, Sally. Yeah. It's a hard one, but it's true. That needs to be our constant aim, particularly in our intercultural relationships, our intercultural communities. This guy, Chris Lowney, was a Jesuit novice in the US. He subsequently left for the Jesuits and joined and became a businessman, a successful one, but always with an interest to look for spiritual values in life even in business. So this particular quarterly magazine, the McKinsey Quarterly from 2015, it was an article about 20 defining characteristics for a good business leader. He's taken 10 of them to say they are good spiritual values, and I think they're useful for us. They're fairly simple. Be supportive. Develop others. Develop and share a collective mission. Give praise. We probably don't do this enough with one another. Foster mutual respect, critical in intercultural relationships, to keep trying to respect one another. You've seen the nature of our community here. There's a couple of the men who are not present just now for reasons of studies. I'm the oldest member of a community of 7. I'm 63. The youngest is Isidoro, or Endo. He is 32. I'm a priest. Endo is a brother. I am tall. Endo is short. I am white. Endo is not. I have done, I guess, a significant amount of study. He would probably tell me he has not, but I don't think that's true. So when he arrived here in the community, I think he was rather confused, because where he comes from, he would call an older, without hair, priest, pater, father. But in our community, we don't use titles. We are 4 priests and 3 brothers. So we use our names. So for 1 year, he did not call me anything. He knew I didn't really want to be called father, and although he wanted to call me father, and he just could not call me Tim without a title. So with time, he began to call me Tim. With time, he began to initiate conversations with me, because where he comes from, normally he would wait for an older person to begin a conversation. So intercultural relationships don't happen like that. They take time. They take this constant intention of respect. Now, our relationship is still not as intercultural as I would like it, but that's my desire. What his desire in our relationship may be, I suspect he has learned about what relationships can be that can still be respectful and not use titles. Where he comes from, respect and titles go together. 40 years ago, in my first culture, that was true also. But in my first culture, some of those things have changed. And I'm a result of that. I'm a result of my culture and a result of my generation and of my gender. It's all part of who I am. You could say some similar things about yourselves. So fostering mutual respect, even if we don't like each other, is really, really important. Number 6, motivate, bring out the best in others. 7, recover positively from failures. As leaders, you fail. I certainly did, at times. The people around you probably don't worry so much about that. What they want to see is how you recover. And from that they can learn how we recover from our failures. To look for different perspectives, as you did this morning with the news coming into infiltrate the day, the news of the world, that we would be asking people that matter around us for their opinion, not just other religious, but lots of people. That we role model values of the organisation. In your case, it's your congregation. And the last one, for me, is fascinating. A good business leader should review the day. What do? We often do the examine, or something like that, to go over the day and try and identify again, how was the Spirit of God present in my day? So if it's good enough for business leaders, it's good enough for us. And it's a good reminder to us to go back to some of these practices. And these practices are good for all of us. Teamwork. Spend time trying to learn, understand, and respect cultural differences. And there's that saying of St. Francis, there's a song, and I think it's in most of the languages here present. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. Where there is sadness, ever joy. Oh, Master, grant that I may never speak so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Very good. To understand, or to actually seek to be understood before understanding ourselves. Good communication. And like Mother Teresa says, differences can be used to complement skills and attitudes. And leaders in intercultural communities need to step into this idea and this reality that some of your sisters will communicate with you directly and some will communicate with you indirectly. Whichever the preference you have is secondary. You absolutely need to be able to just, if you have to tolerate it, but give time to it. It's enormously important in our communities. So as provincial, back in my time, when the guys would come, some would be direct with me, others would talk about the weather, talk about the family, talk about politics, and by this stage I was sitting down because I knew it would take a while. My preference, from my cultural perspective, is to be direct. But for a lot of my brothers, that just does not work. One is not better than the other. We need to develop skills in both. Make culturally correct decision. Nuns on the bus could be done in the US at the time it was done to great effect. It could not be done in other parts of the world as it was done there. So it was a decision that had a cultural bias. It was the right thing to do at the right time in the right place. And so to have effects like that, what do you need to do in your place? Someone has some really creative ideas there and put them into practice. This idea of treating people according to egalitarian criteria, we are equal, or do we work with more hierarchical criteria? Again, one is not better than the other. I've been with religious in my cultural context who have demanded that their brothers treat them equally. And initially, it's almost impossible, like my brother Isidoro. took him time. And if he never got there, I would have lived with that. If he called me Pater, that would be fine. In fact, for the short time I was in Indonesia trying to learn some Bahasa, we are 1,500 Indonesian members of the 6,000, so 1 in 4 of us is Indonesian. I learned that the titles are important. To call me Pater puts me at a distance. To call me Pater Tim means the person is much closer to me. I had to learn that. It was not obvious. So we're looking for relationships and trust. We're looking for that strong team energy, and this is across cultures. This is not just, some of this language comes from a certain cultural context, can be utilised and translated, interpreted into other spaces with effect. Not all of it, but some of it. And this one, something I had to learn. Conflicts need to be attended to reasonably quickly. And if an outcome is that people agree to disagree, then we've done well. So for some of my brothers, everybody has to agree, and we just don't get to that. If we can respectfully agree that people have different opinions, okay. If you're a provincial council and you make a choice together, even though some have different opinions, those trusting relationships are really important to carry the decision forward together. Together.
Tim is asking me if I know the sisters in the picture. And the sister at the microphone is Sister Simone Campbell. She was at this time the director of Network, which is the lobbying or advocacy group that works with the Congress and the Senate in the United States, trying to get them to create laws that include human rights and equal availability of all needs for all the people. They are very good. They're the moral conscience, so to speak, of the Congress and Senate. And so Sister Elaine Betancourt from our province was part of the Nuns on the Bus for one of their times. Others of us have been to see off the Nuns on the Bus when they left or when they were going through Connecticut.
So years ago, when I was in the barrio in Mexico, and young boys between the ages of 14 and 18 began to use drugs, but the drugs they were using were to inhale paint thinner or glue. They did not have the money for more expensive drugs then, but they had access to guns. And so there were gangs outside the parish house that would kill each other. And, once I was at the 4th funeral of boys who had killed each other, all under 16. It was the 4th in 1 month. And so I was at the head of the coffin. The mother and father were at the foot of the coffin. The mother was holding the father up. He was completely drunk, the only way he could cope with the death of his son. And I thought to him, because I was feeling fragile in the parish that I'm responsible, have some responsibility, and here they are killing each other. And I thought to myself, if she can manage this, I can manage this. So we started the brief service. And And she let go one tear. That's all it took. That broke me completely. So I started to yell and say, why are we letting our children kill each other? Why do we let this happen? Until my two Eucharistic ministers came very close to me and said, Si, Padre, basta, si, that's enough, yes, thank you, Father, yes, good. Afterwards, the youth choir said to me, what can we do? They are our friends, and these are the good kids. I said, I don't know. So they insisted, and I said, well, when I was 18, I worked with the St Vincent de Paul in the city of Sydney, and we went out at night to give coffee and sandwiches to homeless people. A very formative experience for me. They said, let's do that. I said, no, that's in Sydney. This is Mexico City. It doesn't work. But they insisted and insisted. And finally we did, with the say-so of the parish council. And to move out at night as a team of people, the parish council came with us, of course, with youth, with drugs and guns, was extremely frightening. But it became a ministry that the parish embraced completely. And it grew. There was one mass we had there with more than 1,000 kids, all who were drug users. And that's when the parish council complained and said, Padre, it's okay for us to work with the drug addicts in our parish, but we are now getting the drug addicts from all over Mexico City coming to the masses here in the parish. But it was beautiful the way the parish owned it. So occasionally ideas can move from one place to another, but instead of coffee and sandwiches, it became coffee, yes, and tortas, or these particular sandwiches that you would make in Mexico City. Only sometimes, mostly, it doesn't work. And I highlight that example because it worked. But we have to think really carefully about bringing ideas like that from one place in the world to another. We can recreate them, refashion them, remodel them, sure. Creativity can come from all directions. But as leaders, I think you have to give these things careful consideration. So, you are called to these intercultural dynamics among your members. And you will need to be taking risks that are intelligent and supported so the reign of God can be proclaimed in new ways with new faces. Now, I'd like to move so that you have a coffee break and then go to small groups. I'd like you to go and do some small group work. So you can all have access to this PowerPoint. So let me move through the PowerPoint and get to that. Questions I would like you to address. So your intercultural lives today. I want you to think carefully about your intercultural lives today. Not your multicultural lives, where sisters from one place or another live next to each other but don't know much about each other, but something deeper. Can you name an intercultural experience within the past 10 years that has changed you? And how do you understand the changes? First question. The second question. What strategies can you create to promote lived interculturality in your community and ministries? So you have your break now, it's 10:30. At 10 to 11, please go to your small groups and consider these questions for 1 hour. Mixed language groups, and return at 10 to 12. So break until 10 to 11. When you go to small groups, return here at 10 minutes to 12. Secretaries within the groups to be able to respond in the plenum so that somebody